Hello, friends. Welcome to this 46th webinar on the Secret Doctrine. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheadings Moria Federation Webinars, then Webinar Series in Progress, as shown here. All episodes of this and the Secret Teaching Series are also now available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald Secret Doctrine or Secret Teachings. This month, as we continue in Volume 3 of Colonel Olcott's Old Diary Leaves, we find HPB and Olcott together on a train to Pondicherry. So we're going to need a total of 3 readers for this.
Okay, I'll start it out, and then Joe, and then Lynn. I lectured on 2 successive days and did a good deal of psychopathic work. On 19th September, it appears, I mesmerized 30 large jars of water and 17 bottles of oil for the use of the sick. HPB was present when, in the usual formal way, I organized a local branch under the name of Coimbatore TS. Our visit finished, we left for Pondicherry, followed by warm protestations of affectionate goodwill. This was one of the 2 or 3 occasions only in which my colleague ever assisted in the formation of Indian branches, despite the foolish idea entertained by many, ignorant of the facts, who constantly talk of her personally founding our branches and wearing herself out with travel and its privations. Greater stuff was never spoken. Her sphere was the literary and spiritual one, and her traveling in those days was mainly limited to the distances between her writing table, the dining room, and her bed. She was as unfit for platform and pioneer organizing work as she was for cooking. And when we remember that she thought to get boiled eggs by laying them raw on the hot coals. Sorry, I'm laughing.
Laugh out loud, that's good.
Her culinary aptitude is easily gauged. Moreover, she had too much sense to try it, but kept strictly to her own department, as I did to mine. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm glad that tickled you. Okay.
From the Nilgiris to the French territory of Pondicherry, one has to cross country from west to east by rail. At Villapuram Junction, changing to a short branch line of 26 miles, it takes one to Pondicherry. An amusing episode occurred between the 2 stations. At the junction, a certain elderly Hindu gentleman of our acquaintance accosted us with the usual signs of exaggerated reference, so easily seen through by foreigners, and begged me to cure a paralytic, some rich or influential person who would apply to me before reaching Pondicherry. Now, this was too much for good nature. If I was to be pestered from morning to night by patients while stopping at stations, at least I ought to be allowed to rest myself while traveling. Naturally, I refused the man's request, but he stuck to me like a leech, got into our compartment of the train, and urged and fawned and begged until he wore out my patience. Just then we came to a place where there was a halt of 10 minutes, and my pest abased himself to the dust to persuade me to get out and cure this man, whom we saw sitting in an armchair on the platform with a number of people about him. In desperation, and to rid myself of the man's importunities, I got out, went over to the sick man, handled his paralyzed limbs, made mesmeric passes over them with a little massage, got his arm flexible, then his leg, made him stand, walk, put his bad foot on his chair, lift the chair with the just paralyzed hand, and then, as the engine whistle blew, salaamed the company and ran back to our carriage.
Okay. Next.
All this while, HPB had sat at a window smoking a cigarette and watching my performance. She had never seen me at this work before and was deeply interested. As the train started, we saw my cured paralytic walk off, followed by his party and by a servant carrying the chair, not one of them looking behind him. The effect upon HPB was most comical to me and set me to laughing heartily. The language she used was choice and so strong that if her words had been leaden shot and hurled at their mark by the full force of her wrath, the backs of the retreating company would have been well peppered. Such ingratitude, such base and disgusting ingratitude she had never seen in her life. What do you mean? I asked. Mean? Why, there was that man almost licking your feet in the train, and to get you to heal his friend, you heal him in the most marvelous way on the platform while the train stops for 10 minutes or so, and he and his friend's friends calmly walk away without a word of thanks or even a backward look of thankfulness. That beats everything I ever saw. I told her that if she had traveled with me and seen my mesmeric healings, she would have realized that the number of patients who had shown real gratitude for benefits conferred were far less than 1 in 100. That if the other 99 were really grateful, they concealed it from view and left me to practice the rule that Sri Krishna gave to Arjuna, to do the necessary thing and care not for the fruits of action. But she never forgot the incident.
Thanks, Lynn. Okay. Well, last time we finished up the commentary on verse 4, about 3 pages of commentary. So let's turn our attention to the verse itself, which is Fohat traces spiral lines to unite the 6th to the 7th, the crown. An army of the sons of light stands at each angle, and the Levika in the middle wheel. They say, this is good. The first divine world is ready. The first is now the second. Then the divine Arupa reflects itself in Chahaya Loka, the first garment of Anupadaka. Okay, first up, Fohat traces spiral lines. In a previous webinar, we talked about the spiral being the inherent motion of the second solar system. But spiralic motion is much more than a path through space. It is also the motive energy of both involution and evolution, which is, subjectively speaking, forward motion, the will aspect of deity, demonstrating by means of the cyclic aspect of form. De Perucker describes this process in his Fundamentals of Esoteric Philosophy. Can we get a reader for this, please?
Aaron, can you read that for us, please?
On descending the shadowy arc, or the arc of matter, in the beginning of the Manvantara of this our planetary chain, the direction which we followed as members of our planetary life wave was from within outwards, for example, from inner planes, from inner worlds, constantly proceeding downwards, that is, into ever increasing materiality. And when we reached the middle of the 4th round on this our globe, which is the central or turning point of the Manvantara of this planetary chain, the impulse slackened and finally reached its close in what we call the 4th root race, the Atlantean race. Thereafter, the reverse process began its action and progress, retracing its steps, as it were, in a spiral, the direction thenceforth being from without inwards, or an ascent in ever-increasing spirituality.
Thank you, Karen. Most germane to our point is, quote, retracing its steps in a spiral from without inwards. So this is the true sense of spiralic motion. Next, to unite the 6th to the 7th, the crown. even though this wording, the 6th to the 7th, suggests an evolutionary return to unity, HPB describes this uniting just a few pages back as, quote, the first link between the ever unconditioned and the manifested, reminding us that we're still in the involutional stages of this stanza. The 6th principle is the vahan, or vehicle of the 7th, or as HPB says, Fohat is the living symbol and container of that force. So the 6th is the living container, living symbol of the 7th, counting from below upwards. And finally, we have, let's get a reader for this.
Yvonne, can you read that for us, please? Oops. Did we just lose you? Okay. Scott, can you read that for us, please?
The monad is the combination of the last two principles in man, the 6th and the 7th. And properly speaking, the term human monad applies only to the dual soul, Atma Buddhi, not to its highest spiritual vivifying principle, Atma alone. But since the spiritual soul, if divorced from the latter, Atma, could have no existence, no being, has thus been called the monadic, or rather cosmic essence.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions about this?
Yes, sorry, I just found Yvonne. And she's got her hand up, which is why I lost her.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. You had a question, Yvonne?
Yeah, I couldn't find the unmute button. Do you mute me or can I do it?
You can
No,
do it.
I had to do it and I did it, and now you can from
Now
now
I
on.
can. Okay, all right. I'll mute myself now.
Okay, good. That's clear. Okay. So finally, DK tells us this fire, which is, by the way, a fire animated by Fohat, this fire is the basic vibration of the little system in which the monad or human spirit is the logos. And it holds the personality or lower material man in objective manifestation, thus permitting the spiritual unit to contact the plane of densest matter. Next up, an army of the sons of light stands at each angle. Can we get a reader for this Theosophical Glossary entry on Sons of Light?
Yvonne, can you read that for us, please?
Thank you. Sons of light, rays of the manifest or third logos, the Numena, or spiritual origins of all phenomena, more directly connected with the light side of nature, the almost innumerable hierarchies of light. Issuing forth, they manifest themselves in respective hierarchies and in serial order on all planes of cosmic matter, and are thus said allegorically to clothe themselves in the fabric of darkness. Darkness may signify the original absolute light, which to all human cognizance seems darkness, or the various fields of cosmic substance or matter in which the luminous spiritual entities function and act, which by contrast with the light of the spiritual beings seems to be dark or obscure.
Thank you. Everybody understand what is meant here by the two types of darkness? One stands beyond the manifesting light and is the source of light, sometimes called the light within the light. Actually, that's a lower form of it, but nonetheless. And then the other is the darkness of matter. And so one is higher than light and the other lower or more material, I should say. Standing at each angle has to do with the idea that each plane of the cosmic physical plane is the expression of some particular geometry, some angle. as described in this excerpt from stanza 11. Could we get a reader for this short piece?
Greg, can you read? Oops. Efrosini, can you read that for us? I'm sorry, okay. I don't see her. All right, let's try Greg again. Greg, can you read that for us, please?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm not at my normal house. I'm actually at a Starbucks in Puyallup, Washington. But okay, so yeah, I'm gonna read.
Great.
The great triangles in their just arrangement hold hid the secret of the wheel of life. The cosmic fire radiates as directed from the second sphere, controlled by the ruler of the merging ray.
Thank you. And thanks for joining us from Starbucks. Okay, in their just arrangement can be seen as a description of how the, quote, army of the sons of light stands at each angle. Next up, and the Lapika in the middle wheel. The Lapika are the middle or primary. The Lapika in are, I'll try this again. The Lapika are in the middle or primary wheel because they are, quote, the highest class of architects, which lay down from Manvantara to Manvantara the tracks of karmic evolution to be followed by all evolving entities within the Manvantara about to begin. Manvantara just means a period of manifestation, cycle, usually a larger cycle of manifestation. The middle wheel is the noumenal sphere of influence from which the Lapikas reconstitute, in accordance with karmic law, the qualities and appearances of the outer wheels. This is the, quote, second sphere of the TCF stanza. Next, they say, this is good. The first divine world is ready. The first is now the second. The first divine world is noumenal ideation, personified by the third logos. The second world is the sphere of the Lapikas. Remember the second seven? The architects who interpret the plan. HPB specifically addresses this part of the verse a couple of pages back. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Carrie, can you read that, please?
The first is the second, because the first cannot really be numbered or regarded as the first, as that is the realm of noumena in its primary manifestation, the threshold to the world of truth, or sat, through which the direct energy that radiates from the one reality, the nameless deity, reaches us. The divine world, the countless lights lit at the primeval light, the buddhis or formless divine souls of the last arupa, formless world, the sum total in the mysterious language of the old stanza.
Thank you, Carrie. Okay, we're making our way through the stanza, through the verse here. So next up, then the divine Arupa reflects itself in Chahaya Loka. Arupa means formless. The divine Arupa is the first world, causal to all manifestation. For a better understanding of Chahaya Loka, let's take a look at the Theosophical Glossary. Could we get a reader, please?
Sure, I'll try this one. Chakaya Loka, from Chaya, shadow, and Loka, world, used in the stanzas of Dzyan for the shadow of cosmic spirit, the first shadowy veil involving the origins of primal or intellectual forms. The divine Arupa, the formless universe of thought, reflects itself in the Chayaloka, the shadowy world of primal form, or the intellectual, the first garment of the Anapadaka.
Thank you. And finally, we have the first garment of the Anupadaka. Actually, and we'll go into the weeds a moment here, the word Anupadaka is a misprint from a dictionary that HPB was using when she wrote the Secret Doctrine. It should read Aupapaduka. At any rate, it means self-generated or parentless. The garment of Aupapaduka is the first, most tenuous phase of the material world. Okay, thoughts or questions on anything from verse 4? Before we move on, let's take a look at what MPH, that's Manly P. Hall, has to say about this verse.
Okay,
Okay.
before we move on,
Yeah.
Scott's got his hand up. Go ahead, Scott.
Yep.
Yeah. Perhaps we've gone over this before, but it seems there is the question here of just how does that reflection happen?
Yeah, I think it's a function of Fohat. And if you read the verses connected with that, there is a mysterious project. First of all, you have the two worlds. You have pure spirit, which is a reflection of the absolute into the first logos. It's no form aspect at all. And then the what's called the divine garment, the feminine second aspect, is created as its own sphere, and they're not connected until Fohat, which is the intent of the Logos to project divine ideation by means of Mahat into the form aspect. Until that is sent forward, you have no interconnection. And so it's always through the medium of Fohat that all further extensions of manifestation occur. It's because there's no pure form at all. It's some level of spirit infused form, and it's the Fohat that does that infusing. So Chahaya Loka, which is the very first tenuous projection, would be made possible by it. At that stage, you would literally be bringing to life Fohat for the first time. And of course, when you're talking about these totally primordial acts, it's always pure mystery because oh well, how does the first logos do that? How does it send? And where was Fohat before the first logos? And it's just you
That's
just
my
can't.
question.
Huh?
That's my question. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, it's
Can't
nothing
get
I've found about where it, except for the term divine ideation, which in the very first pages of the proem is seen as an aspect of the absolute, which is kind of an oxymoron because the absolute has no aspects. But this there is and it's certainly in solar systemic, and I think that may be where you can make sense out of this, which is a kind of freezing of what was before, that then everything is reactivated rather than created new out of nothing, so to speak. And so it's Fohat is, you could say, re-energized into activity, and then manifestation is begun. And some time ago, we determined that these stanzas were, in fact, about the solar system, even though they very often are universally applicable. There are certain qualities to these stanzas that make them very much solar systemic.
Right.
So, doesn't really answer your question.
Who can answer that?
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah, and it's raising the question. This just points to the incredible mystery. It's like what was it? Fohat hangs by the no spirit. Matter hangs from spirit by the tiniest thread of Fohat. That's not the exact quote, but that's the idea. And so you get these old commentary descriptions, but they never say, okay, here's what's really going on. It's all in that language. So yeah, it's as good as I can do with that. Can we get a reader for this MPH? This is a goodie.
Sure. I'm going to ask Scott to read that, but first, Yvonne had a question too. She says, what happens when you put a raw egg in a fire?
Well, you get a charred shell and a partially cooked but egg, in the part that would be next to the fire, and a horrible stench in no time at all. Yeah, I thought that was a very graphic example of her
cooking ability, or not so? Yeah.
Not so much. Not so much.
Okay, Scott, can you read that, please?
A woman of extremes.
I'm reading the right side of the page, yes?
Yes, always.
Good.
Well, no, not always, but here, yes.
Right. As all parts of the body are connected with the brain, so the lords of the 6 angles are connected with spiral threads to the crown, who dwells in the center. The builders, who are called the sons of light, take their places upon the 6 great atoms, while the ruling hierarchy dwells in the center. Thus, the abstract body of the Logos is made. This body is invisible and intangible to such senses as we now possess, but was nevertheless far denser than its preceding state. Condensation has begun in space, and the formless Lord assumed his first body and began the process of being enmeshed in the great illusion of creation.
So, there you have yet another poetic description, Scott, of what you were asking about, right? Condensation had begun in space, but it's you never get more than that. The formless Lord assumed his first body, which would be that Chahaya Loka, but that's all we ever get, at least that I found. So, to my mind, this is a great summary of verse 4. Really adding to some of the concepts. The Lord of the 6 angles are the plane lords of the cosmic physical plane, who are linked by Fohat to the central wheel. The spiral threads, as I mentioned before, suggest the mode of linking that comes into play when connecting higher and lower levels of manifestation. Note MPH's use of the term 6 great atoms, which gives us a different way of visualizing the subplanes of the cosmic physical plane. We have a similar reference in a treatise on cosmic fire. Could we get a reader on this? So I think a much more accurate depiction than the chart, but you can see why the chart is well, after we read the TCF quote, you'll see why it can't be very easily graphically portrayed.
Lenore, can you read that, please?
Sure. The 7 planes, like white atoms, rotate on their own axis and conform to that which is required of all atomic lives. The 7 spheres of any one plane which we call subplanes, equally correspond to the system. Each has its 7 revolving wheels or planes that rotate through their own innate ability. Due to latent heat, the heat of the matter of which they are formed.
Okay, any thoughts or questions about this concept? It's very provocative, and I think a much more realistic depiction. Why the discrepancy between 6 and 7 atoms? I think we'd be on safe ground to say that the 7th atom is the realm of noumenal being, the central wheel in which the 6 have their being, the sea of fire in DK writings, from which the sons of light issue forth. Okay, any thoughts?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yvonne has her hand up, but I have a question too. Can you go back to that Manly P. Hall? That. Does he have a whole series of manuscript series on different things, and this is just one on the special class and the secret doctrine? Or is this number 37 in the special class on the secret doctrine?
Good question. No, your first supposition is the correct one. He has, that would be terrific if there was, if this was a whole series on the secret doctrine, but that's not the case. There's 2 on the secret doctrine. I think it's 36 and 37. And the manuscript series was early, fairly early. I think in the late 20s and early 30s. And it was kind of somebody needs to be muted. Sounds like they're dragging their brass knuckles over pavement or something. Anyway, so the rest of the manuscript series are on different subjects.
Thank you. Okay. Yvonne, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes, on that last graph you had about the permanent atoms, the different planes.
Right, yeah, here.
The six permanent atoms that he's talking about, the 6 atoms. My question is, are we talking about the permanent atoms of each plane?
No.
No?
No, it could be related, but what he's saying is the planes themselves are like great atoms. The 7 planes, likewise atoms, right, rotate on their own axes. So he's given us an entirely different way of viewing the planes themselves, right? And conform to that which is required of all atomic lives. Therefore, they have they're a form aspect, right? In that they have the shape of a spherical shape that conforms to atomic lives. Babbitt gave an illustration of what this atom looks like. Then he's going on to say that the 7 spheres of any one plane, which we call subplanes, equally correspond to the system. So we can look at this in 2 ways. We can look at this as this whole thing is one plane with each of these as subplanes, in which case the other 6 would be the cosmic planes. Or we can look at the subplanes of this plane, right, as each having its own sphere. I think certainly both are true, right? Now, you could, I think, make a good argument for the idea that the permanent atoms are the point at the center of these spheres, that they're the, if you were to take it into spheroidal form, and hold within it the animating life aspect, So I think, I think you could make a good argument for that. But the sphere would encompass the entire plane or subplane, depending on what you're looking at, right?
Thank you.
And then Anne Veronica says, I was reading about the nadis today, and it was saying the nadis are 5-fold. And to make a major center, we need 21 nadis to intersect.
Yeah.
What we read just now reminds me of this. It is the golden bowl of the planetary logos.
Yeah, I think there's a connection between centers and planes of consciousness. You know, if you think, for instance, that the logos, the solar logos, that the planetary lives are centers in the planetary in the solar logos, and that they also rule over these various planes, there's certainly a connection there. And yeah, what you were saying about the nadis is very interesting. You know, there's many lesser centers. There's even more than 21. But there's what did you say? It was seven lines of force that cross to form a major one, or five? I think you said five.
No, she said 21. The nadis are fivefold, and to make a major center, we need 21 nadis to intersect.
Was that right?
Is what she said.
Okay, well that's news to me. At any rate, whatever the number is, there's also lesser centers that would have, using that system, 14 nadis interconnected, and then lesser centers yet that have 7 nadis interconnected. But all of these are important points within the form that hold and define a particular aspect of the physical energy system. Yeah. Anyone else?
Well, she says there's a total of 105, but that's all that we've got here. So.
Okay, yeah, that would be 5 times 21, right? 105. So interesting. Okay, let's see. Getting back to the present. So. Final thoughts on this, and then we went to the MPH. Okay, on to verse 5, which is the shortest verse in the stanza, and reads, Fohat takes 5 strides and builds a winged wheel at each corner of the square for the 4 holy ones and their armies. With HPB's inserted comments, the verse reads, Fohat takes 5 strides, having already taken the first 3, and builds a winged wheel at each corner of the square for the 4 holy ones and their armies, which she then describes as being hosts, which I think is more accurate. So let's take a look at the commentary on section A. Could we get a reader for this? It's always the middle panel that you read of when we're doing this stuff.
Okay. And Veronica, can you read that, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The strides, as already explained, see commentary on stanza 4, refer to both the cosmic and the human principles, the latter of which consists in this exoteric division of 3, spirit, soul, and body, and in the esoteric calculation of 7 principles, 3 rays of the essence and 4 aspects. Those who have studied Mr. Sinnett's esoteric Buddhism can easily grasp the nomenclature. There are 2 esoteric schools, or rather one school divided into 2 parts, one for the inner Lanus, the other for the outer or semi-lay Chelas beyond the Himalayas. The first teaching a septenary, the other a 6-fold division of human principles. The asterisk, the 4 aspects of the body, its life or vitality, and the double of the body, the triad which disappears with the death of the person, and the kama rupa which disintegrates in kama loka.
Okay, any thoughts or questions that occur immediately on reading this? HPB addresses the concept of quote-unquote fohatic strides at length in her commentary on verse 2 of this stanza, shown here, which we considered during webinar 40. Verse 2 states, quote, Fohat takes 3 and 5 and 7 strides through the 7 regions above and the 7 below. Her concluding statement on the 3 5s and 7 strides is, these 3 strides relate metaphysically to the descent of spirit into matter, of the Logos falling as a ray into spirit, then into soul, and finally into the human physical form of man, in which it becomes life. She restates this idea in the paragraph we are currently studying, quote, the strides refer to the human principles, which consist in the exoteric division of spirit, soul, and body. So, the 5 strides in this verse specifically link spirit to soul and address that soul aspect, both micro and macrocosmically. HPB then makes the further observation that this threefold division is esoterically expressed as 7 principles, quote, 3 rays of the essence and 4 aspects, which, if casually read, we might be tempted to relate to the Bailey nomenclature, which lists 3 rays of aspect and 4 rays of attribute. However, when we read the footnote, we realize that the 4 aspects are something entirely different, leading us to realize that the, quote, 3 rays of the essence refer to Atma, Buddhi, Manas, not the first 3 rays in the Bailey system, though there is a direct relationship between the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rays and Atma, Buddhi, Manas. Let's take a closer look at the footnote. The lowest aspect is the gross physical body. And we're talking about old-time theosophy here, old-time religion, right? Not decayed theosophy. And this is called the Stula Sharira. Stula Sharira. The next higher aspect is what Bailey describes as the etheric vehicle, but 19th century theosophy called simply prana, listed here as its life or vitality. Number 3, called here the double, is the linga sharira. More on this in a moment. And number 4, kama rupa, is the vehicle of desires and passions, the astral body of decay, or the closest thing to it, and Alice Bailey, keeping in mind that the term astral has different connotations in traditional theosophy. Let's take a look at an excerpt from the Theosophical Glossary entry on linga sharira. Can we get a reader for this, please?
Sharon, can you read that for us, please?
Linga, to the whole thing, the left to the right, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Linga Sarira, Sanskrit, from linga, characteristic mark, model, pattern, plus sarira, form, from the verbal root sri, to molder, waste away. A pattern or model that is impermanent. The model body or astral body, only slightly more ethereal than the physical body. The second principle in the ascending scale of the 7-fold human constitution. It is the astral model around which the physical body is built, and from which the physical body flows or develops as growth proceeds. The linga sarira is formed before the body is formed, and thus serves as a model or pattern around which the physical body is molded and grows to maturity. It is as mortal as is the physical body, and disappears with the physical body, dissolving atom by atom with the atoms of the physical corpse. It is composed of electromagnetic matter, which is somewhat more refined than the matter of our physical body.
Thank you. So the term astral, as here used, just means more tenuous. It really relates very much to the etheric body of in the Bailey teachings. A chart and footnote on page 153 of the Secret Doctrine, so it's coming up in 30 pages, gives us a simple list of the 7 principles. Could someone read just this footnote here?
Michelle, can you read that for us, please?
Sure, I think you mean me.
Yes, yes.
Okay, sure. The footnote where it begins or,
Yes.
okay. Or as usually named after the manner of esoteric Buddhism and others. 1, Atma. 2, Buddhi or spiritual soul. 3, Manas, human soul. 4, Kama Rupa, vehicle of desires and passions. 5, Linga Sarira. 6, Prana. 7, Satula Sarira.
Okay, so you can see, it's generally the same as Alice Bailey Theosophy, but there's a different, mostly different wording for the same reality. But it's interesting, this chart, the way it's divided here, where you have the highest spirit is Atma, right, which is connected to Buddhi, Atma Buddhi. That's what in old Theosophy they call the monad, right? Then you have Manas, which is the human soul, as opposed to the spiritual soul, which is here. And then Kamarupa, which is the vehicle of desire. So they're connected very much like what's called Kama Manas, mind and emotions, which creates illusion and glamour, right? In this, and then you have getting down into the strictly physical, even though etheric physical, you have with 5 the Linga Sharira, which is the seat of the manifested life. Prana, which is the demonstration of the Linga Sharira. And then finally, the recipient of all this, the Stula Sharira. So, if you're a DK student, you can see the connections, and yet it's a little different in the language. And this is how it's going to be phrased in the Secret Doctrine. Any thoughts or questions about this? Okay. The second half of the paragraph contrasts the eso and exoteric schools, the former recognizing 7 and the latter 6 principles in the human constitution. The 7th principle is the monad, the one who expresses itself through its 6 progressively more form-oriented principles. Any thoughts or questions so far? You can always jump in if something, if finally something occurs to you that's a couple of pages back, don't be shy, just jump in. Next up, can we get a reader, please?
Catherine, can you read that for us, please? Here, let me unmute you. I guess I can't. I guess she's gone. Okay. Carrie, can you read that, please?
From a cosmic point of view, Fohat taking 5 strides refers here to the 5 upper planes of consciousness and being. The 6th and the 7th, counting downwards, being the astral and the terrestrial, or the 2 lower planes. B, 4 winged wheels at each corner for the 4 holy ones and their armies or hosts. These are the four Maharajas, or great kings of the Dhyan Chowans, the Devas who preside each over one of the four cardinal points. They are the regents or angels who rule over the cosmical forces of north, south, east, and west, forces having each a distinct occult property.
Okay. Any thoughts or questions about this?
Not about this, but Anne Veronica from the images you had just a minute ago says 1 has no lines, 2 has 5 lines, and 3 has 7 lines. Can't count the other globes.
Okay. Well, I think you may be reading a little more into it than is intended. That's just, I mean, maybe it means something, but my sense is that it's just describing denser materiality through using lines as a shading mechanism. You know, because here, for instance, the lines are quite thick, but you know, there may be something to it. Interesting. Great impulse to count everything and see, to see, you know, to see if there's some sense of it. Okay. Anything else?
Yes, Trudy has her hand up. Go ahead, Trudy.
Yeah, the four directional devas, are they the archangels of north, west, east, and south?
They are indeed. They're Maharajas, archangels. They're the intelligence behind the cardinal points, and we'll be reading about them for the next 5 pages. So we're just really just finishing up on the Phohatic strides, and then we're going to be entering this other study, which has to do with the 4 Maharajas. They're karmic, connected with the Lapika, but not the same as the Lapika. So we'll be looking at that. Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right, where were we here? Yeah, here. Here we are. Okay. So first, dealing with this last bit on the on Phohat, the relationship between Phohatic strides and the planes of consciousness is pretty clear, especially when we understand that it is equally true on cosmic levels. DK gives us further info on this point. It's a fascinating and unique quote. Could we get a reader, please?
Trudy, can you read that for us, please?
On each plane, one of these brothers, Phohat, holds sway, and the 3 elder brothers rule on the 1st, 3rd, and the 5th plane, or on the plane of Adi, Atma, and Manas.
Okay, this is the only reference that I've come across that even begins to explain why Phohat strides skip the even-numbered planes. I mean, why isn't it the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd plane? Those are the highest, most spiritual. Why aren't those the ones that are held by the elder brothers, quote unquote? So here are some ideas that I have about this. Number 1, the even-numbered planes act as vehicles for the odd-numbered planes and are thus relegated to the lesser brothers, who electrically energize the substance of the even-numbered planes. This idea works better on some pairings of planes than others. A second related possibility is that Phohatic activity sets up an electrically charged alternating current or alternating polarity, with the positive pole under the provenance of the quote-unquote elder brothers. The 5th stride is particularly relevant to our 5th root race because of Phohat's close connection with Mahat, who together stimulate our mental sheath, thus eventually awakening our consciousness to the illuminated higher mental plane. So any thoughts or questions about this?
And Veronica says on the even number planes, the divas and the humans meet.
I like that. That sounds very likely that there would be a provenance, a Davic provenance on the even numbered planes. Yeah. And the Devas, of course, are lords of the form aspect. So, yeah. So you could have a kind of, this could affect the negative polarity of the even numbered planes. Anyone else? It's pretty esoteric, but, inquiring minds want to know. Okay, next up, the B section, referencing the last half of the verse, which reads, and builds a winged wheel at each corner of the square for the 4 holy ones and their armies or hosts. Though not named in the verse itself, the 4 holy ones are the 4 Maharajas. This is an extensive and important topic that HPB addresses over the next several pages. So we're turning a corner here. Let's take a look at an introduction on the topic of the 4 Maharajas, also called Deva Rajas, from Charles Leadbeater's The Astral Plane, Its Scenery, Inhabitants, and Phenomena. It sounds like a travel guide, doesn't it? So, okay, could we get a reader, please?
Okay, Christine, can you read that for us, please? We can't hear you, but it looks like...
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, how did you know? I wanted to know what the heck this was about. Though we cannot claim them as belonging exactly to any of our classes, this is perhaps the best in which to mention those wonderful and important beings, the 4 Devajaras. In this name, the word Deva must not, however, be taken in the sense which we have been using it, for it is not over the Deva kingdom, but over the 4 elements of earth, water, air, and fire, with their indwelling nature, spirits, and essences. That these 4 kings rule. I'll be back to that. What the evolution has been through which they rose to their present height of power and wisdom, we cannot tell, save only that it has certainly not passed through anything corresponding to our humanity. They are often spoken of as the regents of the earth, or angels of the 4 cardinal points. And the Hindu books call them Chatura Maharaja, giving their names as, oh boy, Ditra Rajatra, Virtue, oh come on, Haka, Virtue.
Hang on. Let me do that for you.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah, just for this, because I have been looking at this a little bit. So it's the Chatur Maharajas, and their names are Dhritarashtra, Verudaka, Verupaksha, and Vaishravana. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I had to unmute her there for a minute because you were echoing when you were talking. You should be able to talk now. Again, Christine, you need to unmute yourself.
Oh, gotcha.
There you go.
Okay. Where am I? In the same books, their elemental hosts are called
Gandharvas, Kumbhandas, and Nagas.
Kumbhandas and Nagas, and Yakshas, respectively. The points of the compass appropriated to each being in corresponding order: east, south, west and north. That's important. And their symbolical colors, white, blue, red, and gold. We have to go over this. They are mentioned in the Secret Doctrine as winged globals and fiery wheels. And in the Christian Bible, Ezekiel makes a very remarkable attempt at a description of them in which every similar words are used, or very similar. Reference to them are to be found in the symbology of every religion, and they have always been held in the highest reference as the protectors of mankind, which means I've been wanting to buy the Ezekiel wheel book.
Well, yeah. Okay, so let me just make a comment here.
Which direction? Right. Which direction do we start in over here where the four elements? That's what
Okay,
you start on the east.
Yeah, east, south, west, and north are the directions that are described. And actually, I cover that in just a little bit, so we don't have to memorize it because I cover it with illustration. So, but what I don't go into further is these names. We're not used to this, just looking at these names, but take a moment to realize that we're actually being given the names of these four great karmic lords who control all humanity. And here's one of them right here, the Virudaka, the second one, right, which would be the south, king of the south. So you have Dhritarashtra, Virudaka, Virupaksha, and Vaishravana. And that the host, remember in the verse, it says, that they, and their hosts, their elemental hosts, well, they also have the names Gandharvas, Kumbhandas, Nagas, which we know is related to serpents, and Yakshas, respectively. So, there's a correspondence always between the direction, color, and names of the lords themselves and of their hosts. So it's a fascinating study, and it keeps going. So next up, could we get a reader for this last half of the quote?
Okay. Lynn, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. It is they who are the agents of man's karma during his life on earth, and thus they play an extremely important part in human destiny. These great karmic deities of the cosmos weigh the deeds of each personality when the final separation of its principles takes place at the end of its astral life, and give, as it were, the mold of an etheric double exactly suitable to its karma for the man's next birth. But it is the Deva Rajas who, having command of the elements of which that etheric double must be composed, arrange their proportion so as to fulfill accurately the intention of the Labika. It is they who also who constantly watch all through life to counterbalance the changes perpetually being introduced into man's condition by his own free will and that of those around him, so that no injustice may be done and karma may be accurately worked out, if not in one way, then in another. A learned dissertation upon these marvelous beings will be found in Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, pages 122 through 126. They are able to take human material forms at will, and several cases are recorded when they have done so. All the higher nature spirits and the hosts of the artificial elementals act as their agents in the stupendous work they carry out, yet all the threads are in their hands, and the whole responsibility rests upon them alone. It is not often that they manifest upon the astral plane, but when they do, they are certainly the most remarkable of its non-humans inhabitants. A study of occultism will not need to be told that as there are 7 great classes, both of nature spirits and elemental essences, There must really be 7 and not 4 Deva Rajas. But outside the circle of initiation, little is known and less may be said of the higher 3.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Okay, so any thoughts or questions about Lead Beater's quote here? So a lot of provocative material in here. But we'll be with this material for a little while. Can we get a reader for the next part of this long paragraph?
Joe, can you read that for us, please?
These beings are also connected with karma, as the latter needs physical and material agents to carry out her decrees, such as the 4 kinds of winds, for instance, professedly admitted by science to have their respective evil and beneficent influences upon the health of mankind and every living thing. There is a cult philosophy in that Roman Catholic doctrine which traces the various public calamities, such as epidemics of disease and wars and so on, to the invisible messengers from north and west. The glory of God comes from the way of the east, says Ezekiel, while Jeremiah, Isaiah, and the psalmist assure their readers that all the evil under the sun comes from the north and the west, which proposition, when applied to the Jewish nation, sounds like an undeniable prophecy for themselves.
Okay. Any thoughts or questions about this segment? The 4 winds carry out the intent of the 4 Maharajas, lords of the 4 directions. Wind is here used as a metaphor for a moving, invisible force, which allows karma, good or bad, to be applied. In spite of the way HPB presents this teaching, these forces are not, it seems to me, inherently good or evil, but as agents of the intent of the lords of karma, a means by which a person or nation's karma can be brought to bear. Could we get a reader for this quote from Keys to the Universe?
Karen, can you read that for us, please?
The wind, like the breath of the physical body, is a manifestation of the spirit, which comes from we know not whence and goeth we know not whither. It is said that from the north and west come all diseases and all afflictions, while from the east and south come all benefits. The winds, like the breath of the physical body, are but vehicles of spiritual powers operating on earth, through which the lords of karma bring about their decrees. Excuse me. Even that which seems to be evil ultimately resulting for the benefit of the world and its inhabitants. Just as the signs of the zodiac have their rulers, so do the 4 quarters of the earth. The powers which operate in the creation of earth are focused in these 4 cardinal points, or rather their rulers manipulate certain creative forces, both in the evolution of the globe and in the individual. These forces, being both cause and effect, are the law of karma. In the spiritual life, these beasts or lords symbolize the power to know, the power to dare, the power to do, and the power to keep silent. Without these 4 powers, the soul cannot reach mastery.
Thank you. Gerald Massey gives us further insight into this quote from the Natural Genesis. Could we get a reader, please?
Sure. Scott's got his hand up. So, Scott,
Yeah.
you want to go ahead and ask your question, and then if you'll read for us again, please.
Okay. Are you going to bother to make the connection for those last, the 4 dares there, the 4...
I just, I had a feeling that you were going to hold my feet to that particular fire.
Just wondering.
So what are the signs that relate? Let's go back. So we have here the power to know, the power to dare, power to do, and the power to keep silent. Of course, these are famous writing from DK as well as other sources. So do you know the sign equivalents, Scott?
Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, Scorpio.
Okay, so it's a fixed cross.
That's the fixed cross.
Right. So starting with, did you do them in order? So Aquarius, Leo, to dare, to know Aquarius, to dare Leo, to do Taurus, and to keep silent Scorpio. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And these are going to be very much connected with, I would imagine, all the other aspects of the four, right? The colors, the directions, etc. I mean, you can easily make Aquarius to the north. Isn't that correct? Wouldn't you put Aquarius to the north, or would you put it to the south?
That's the way it looks on the zodiac. But determining what north, south, east, and west are at any point in any of this is right.
Yeah. It's not just as obvious as looking at a chart and seeing where they are, because, for instance, the south is considered beneficent, the north, the bringer of ill tidings, right, or negative karma. So, these four qualities, for instance, are not positive or negative. They're just, I would say, if anything, they're all positive qualities. So you couldn't do that kind of way of determining couldn't use that way to determine their directions,
Yeah, if you're going to do it in the order that he gave the before, from they were northeast, south, and west, right? Didn't he go around in that order?
Well, let's see. You're talking about back here.
Or here we go. It goes east, south. It goes east, south, west, and north.
East, south, west, and north. So, if we
So it's-
were to apply that.
Turning around counterclockwise.
Right.
So normally, well, what's the east here? Doesn't matter. It depends on where you want to start it.
Yeah. That's really what it amounts to, isn't it? Yeah. And do you go across or do you go around,
Well, this is set up for a cross.
Yeah. This is set up for a cross because of the signs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that would take some study, and also applying the colors, and, the lords themselves and their hosts would be interesting, to see. It would take a bit of research, into, like, you could use Dowson, dictionary of these terms to read about each of these qualities and lords and hosts and see if you could, make a connection that way.
I'm sure it's been done. And of course, the colors are should be most skeptical of that are given. Not only because they come from Ledbetter, but because even HVB recognizes their exoteric and esoteric colors that are given.
Exactly.
There's definitely
Indeed. Yeah. Right. What was the order you gave the colors in? What was it?
White, blue, red, gold.
White, blue, red, gold. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll just leave it at that for now. But it's interesting to
move on,
to connect.
Okay. Before you guys move on to this discussion, Greg says usually Aries is associated with East, Libra with West, Cancer with South, and Capricorn. At the north, although if you're looking at the astrological chart, it would be Cancer at the north and Capricorn at the south. But
you're on the cardinal cross, but there would be directionality on each cross. So that would be one. That would be true on the cardinal cross. But for the fixed cross, you would have a different set of signs ascribed to each direction.
Right. And Anne Veronica says we have the intermediate winds, that is the X in the square.
Uh-huh. Indeed. Northwest, southeast, etc. And they're mentioned actually in HPB's text, and that's coming up. So just briefly, but it is mentioned. Okay, Scott, could you read this, please? This is a little more erudite, as Gerald Massey always is.
That's a great papyrus piece you put above that, two of them. Four spirits stand, four powers preside, four winds blow, or four waters flow at the four cardinal points or the four corners of the mount in the general myths of the world. This being a primordial type like the serpent or the tree. The lotus is also a figure of the mountain Meru in India, and the Kamite original of the lotus as the mount of the four corners may be seen in the Hall of the Two Truths, where Osiris presides as judge of all the world. The earth is here represented by the four spirits, gods or genii of the four corners, who stand on lotus blossoms before him. This becomes the lotus tree of Muslim legend. Four immortals are spoken of in the Atharva Veda as the guardians of the four quarters of the sky. Four spirits appear in the book of Enoch as the four great angels, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Phanuel. The four winds or spirits of the four quarters are described by Enoch. The first wind is called the eastern. The second is called the south because the Most High descends there. The western wind has the name of diminution because it is there that all the luminaries are diminished and descend. The fourth wind, which is named the north, is divided into three, and the third part contains paradise.
Yeah, just to muddy the waters on the directions, there you have, another idea.
Certainly works in a Masonic lodge.
Yeah. Indeed. That's interesting. Right. With the worshipful master in the east, master warden in the west,
Senior warden in the west.
Senior warden in the west, I mean.
Junior warden in the south. And there's darkness in the north.
And darkness in the north. Right.
It's
divided into three. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so yeah, this is, like a comic strip, right? You have it divided in half right here where my cursor is. He's brought before Anubis, and where his heart is weighed against a feather. In other words, when you're karma free, then you move on. Otherwise, your heart is thrown to this critter right here, and you go back into incarnation. And then this part, provided you pass this test, you're brought before Osiris and the four great Maharajas who stand witness to your being free of karma. So it's absolutely fabulous. If there was no other testament to the Egyptian belief system, this mural alone would be all you would need to know to the esoteric nature of the Egyptian way. Hall of the Two Truths. Okay. Any questions about this before we move on? All right. Can we get a reader, please?
Yvonne, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. And this accounts also for St. Ambrose, declaring that it is precisely for that reason that we curse the north wind, and that during the ceremony of baptism, we begin by turning towards the west, sidereal, to renounce the the better him who inhabits it, after which we turn to the east. Belief in the four Maharajas, the regents of the four cardinal points, has universal and is now that of Christians, who call them, after St. Augustine, angelic virtues and spirits when enumerated by themselves, and devils when named by pagans. Says the scholarly Boecius in his Theological Circulation, something number 7, though St. Augustine has said that every visible thing in this world had an angelic virtue as an overseer near it, it is not individuals, but entire species of things that must be understood. Each such species having indeed its particular angel to watch it. He is at one in this with all the philosophers. For us, these angels are spirits separated from objects, whereas for the philosophers, pagan, they were gods. Considering the ritual established by the Roman Catholic Church for spirits of the stars, the latter look suspiciously like gods and were no more honored and prayed to by the ancient and modern pagan rabble than they are now at Rome by the highly cultured Catholic Christians.
Okay, thoughts or questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Anne Veronica says the bird. What does it mean?
The bird? Where's the bird?
It might have been right before this.
What did the bird mean? It was this is what you're talking about, I bet. Yeah. This would be the vehicle of Ra, which would be basically from DK point of view would be it was actually called, there was a name for this. What was it? What was that entity that darted hither and thither? But it's the eye of awareness, carrying the feather of Ma'at. So it would be the overlord of this entire ceremony, you could say, which would be, in this case, the planetary logos itself. But it would be that Shu is the name of that being, that Egyptian being who was the personification of the eye in Egyptian. And you could say it's the eye of awareness of the higher potencies. Not being an Egyptologist, that's as good as I can do. Okay, so here we are. Okay, so any thoughts or questions about this? So, a little more about the winds here, the north wind. And then we move to the second paragraph wherein HPB points out the sense of exclusivity born from the hypocritical nature of the church, which condemned all pagan deity, even those beings acknowledged by the church under a different name, such as the angelic virtues. It was HPB was tongue-in-cheek when she said the pagan rabble, right? Because she would consider herself numbered among them. So though himself a rector, this quote by Vossius, who was a great 17th century humanist, scholar, and philologist, shows an understanding that transcends church doctrine. I've reproduced the quote here. And is much in line with theosophical thought, for he implicitly recognizes those great Davic beings who oversee and guide all species of plant and animal, as well as the human kingdom. Nonetheless, he seems to have fallen for the idea that, unlike modern Christians, the quote-unquote pagans worshipped these angelic beings, an idea which HPB goes to some length here to refute. Any thoughts about this? Okay, next up. Can we get a reader, please?
Lenora, can you read that for us, please?
Okay, I'm muted. But where is the difference between the pagans and the Christians in this cause? Following Plato, Aristotle explained that the term stoicheia was understood only as meaning the incorporeal principles placed at each of the four great divisions of our cosmical world to supervise them. Thus, no more than the Christians did do they adore and worship the elements and the cardinal imagery points, but the gods that ruled these respectively. For the church, there are two kinds of sidereal beings, the angels and the devils. For the Kabbalist and occultist, there is but one, and neither of them makes any difference between the rectors of light. And the cosmocratores, or the rectores tenebrarum harum, whom the Roman Church imagines and discovers in a rector of light as soon as he is called by another name than the one she addresses him by.
Okay, let's see if we can unravel this part of the paragraph. First of all, any thoughts or questions come up? The Greek term stoicheia, and Veronica, you can correct me on that if I'm pronouncing it wrong. I have it as stoicheia, possibly, has a wide variety of meanings, ranging from the very mundane, all in an ordered line, to the very archaic and esoteric stars or astral bodies as elements of fire and the stellar spirits associated with those heavenly bodies. This latter meaning is in keeping with Aristotle's understanding of the word, quote, the incorporeal principles placed at each of the four great divisions of our cosmical world to supervise them. So it's just another name for what we've been talking about all along here. The Stoicheia, meaning the four Maharajas. Here, HPB makes a distinction between the elements, the cardinal points, and one could add to this list the four winds and the four rivers associated with these points. In other words, the four energetic streams, and the great Maharajas themselves who preside over these potencies. And here she highlights the difference between belief between the church and occultism. In traditional Christianity, the unseen realm is divided into good and evil, whereas the occult recognizes the inherent unity of both, seeing them as involutional and evolutional principles, but nonetheless united. Rectores tenebrarum harum literally means, you ready for this one? The fragrance of the dark rector, which might be translated as the influence of the dark forces, or more simply, evil. So any questions about this?
Not a question, but Anne Veronica says that, however you say that word, stoicheia, that it means elements.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that, Anne Veronica.
It is called stichia.
Stichia. Okay,
Yes.
so you don't say stoa, you say just
No, stichia.
Gotcha.
The O and the I is an I for us. It becomes an I, stichia.
I'll try to remember that. Good. All right. Excellent. All right. Next up. Could we get a reader, please?
Anne Veronica, can you read that for us, please?
Okay, hello.
Hi.
It is not the rector or the Maharaja who punishes or rewards with or without God's permission or order, but man himself, his deeds or karma, attracting individually and collectively, as in the case of whole nations sometimes, every kind of evil and calamity. We produce causes, and these awaken the corresponding powers in the sidereal world, which powers are magnetically and irresistibly attracted to and react upon those who produce these causes, whether such persons are practically the evildoers or simply thinkers who brood mischief. Thought is matter, we are taught by modern science, and every particle of the existing matter must be a register of all that has happened, as in the principles of science, Messrs. Jevons and Babbage, am I saying right, tell the profane.
And go ahead and read the footnote.
Not of the asterisk, not of course in the sense of the German materialist Moleskot, who assures us that thought is the movement of matter, a statement of almost unequal absurdity. Mental states and bodily states are utterly constructed as such, but that does not affect the position that every thought, in addition to its physical accompaniment, brain change, exhibits an objective thought to us, supersensuously objective aspect on the astral plane. Sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to reread that one part. It exhibits an objective, though to us supersensuously objective, aspect on the astral plane. So thank you. Yeah. Any thoughts or questions about this? We have here a hugely important teaching. The lords of karma do not punish us for our transgressions. They simply uphold a law that is as intractable as any other law of nature. If you step into a precipice, you will suffer injury or death. If you harm someone through design or deed, the law of karma is automatically brought into activity as a result of that transgression. Or as HPB puts it, such deeds, quote, awaken the corresponding powers in the sidereal world. Such deeds initiate a cycle of cause and totally impersonal karmic effect. It affects you personally, but it comes through an impersonal law. Any thoughts about this? Any thoughts or questions? Okay, next. Thought is matter, and every particle of the existing matter must be a register of all that has happened. Way back on page 104 of this book, HPB elaborated on this idea. Could we get a reader, please? This is back on page 104 of the Secret Doctrine. She references this book on the left.
Gary, can you read that for us, please?
The eternal record is no fantastic dream, for we meet with the same records in the world of gross matter. A shadow never falls upon a wall without leaving thereupon a permanent trace, which might be made visible by resorting to proper processes, says Dr. Draper. The portraits of our friends or landscape views may be hidden on the sensitive surface from the eye, but they are ready to make their appearance as soon as proper developers are resorted to. A spectre is concealed on a silver or a glassy surface until, by our necromancy, we make it come forth into the visible world. Upon the walls of our most private apartments, where we think the eye of intrusion is altogether shut out, and our retirement can never be profaned, there exist the vestiges of all our acts, silhouettes of whatever we have done. Doctors Jevons and Babbage believe that every thought, displacing the particles of the brain and setting them in motion, scatters them throughout the universe, and they think that Each particle of the existing matter must be a register of all that has happened. Principles of Science, Volume 2, page 455. Thus, the ancient doctrine has begun to acquire rights of citizenship in the speculations of the scientific world.
Thank you, Carrie. So next, from the footnote, every thought, in addition to its physical accompaniment, brain change, exhibits an objective, though to us supersensuously objective, aspect on the astral plane. HPB's astral plane includes the Akasha. It's not DK's astral plane. And the Akasha, modern theosophy teaches us, is where all thoughts and deeds are recorded. Here's the quote from A.P. Sennon's The Occult World, which is referenced here. Could we get a reader, please?
Yes, Michelle, can you read that for us, please?
Every thought of man upon being evolved passes into the inner world and becomes an active entity by associating itself. Coalescing, we might term it, with an elemental, that is to say, with one of the semi-intelligent forces of the kingdoms. It survives as active intelligence, a creature of thou mind's begetting, for a longer or shorter period, proportionate with the original intensity of the cerebral action which generated it. Thus, a good thought is perpetuated as an active, beneficent power, an evil one as a maleficent demon. And so man is continually peopling his current in space with a world of his own, crowded with the offsprings of his fancies, desires, impulses, and passions, a current which reacts upon any sensitive or nervous organization which comes in contact with it in proportion to its dynamic intensity. The Buddhist calls this his Shanda. The Hindu gives it the name of karma. The adept evolves these shapes consciously. Other men throw them off unconsciously.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions? This is tremendous food for thought in this. Sorry for those couple of misprints here.
Okay. You have a question from Karen. She says, why do you think that DK does not include the Akashic records as part of the astral plane?
Well, because they're at they exist on a much higher plane. I'm trying to remember where. It's in the cosmic etheric levels, so it's not on the astral. The astral plane is, from the higher perspective, non-existent, and is by its very nature impermanent. It's constantly mutable, always changing. So it would not be an appropriate or possible place to store the records, you could say, of every thought that has come forth. Does anybody know offhand, DK person, which subplane of the cosmic physical the Akashic is on?
Yeah, I'm looking right now. It's on the monadic, the love wisdom.
That's what I think.
And
I was going to say that, but I wasn't sure.
I think it's Light of the Soul, page 334 and 335, that talks about it. And I believe what it says in there is that the astral light is a reflection of the Akasha.
Right. Yeah, sure, it would be. So, but the permanent records, would be on etheric levels, because everything below the etheric goes, at the dissolution of, whatever, a root race, a world, whatever. But the etheric holds more permanence. Okay, any other questions?
Karen's got her hand up.
Yeah, well, just because DK was involved with HPB and this secret doctrine, I mean, I'm just wondering why in one and not in the other.
Well, he wasn't the only one involved, and you have to remember that it was very much reintroducing the ancient wisdom teachings, and there were actually 6 total. Actually 5 masters and 1 kind of librarian involved that helped her, and he was a major influence. But it has a lot to do with the difference between HPB and the Times, the 1888, and Alice Bailey, and it being 1922. Right? It's in terms of how the material was presented.
I think that's true of a lot of the things that were in Theosophy and that are in DK, because trying to sort out the language has been really challenging in many areas.
Can be, you can usually see the common thread, even though there will be a little difference in nomenclature and in wording. The essential truths, run through both. The old time theosophy, which is of course still practiced, existed before the Secret Doctrine. So it was adapted. I mean, it was largely because of HPB, but she had been writing, for 13 plus years already before the Secret Doctrine came out, developing this system, right? Or translating, I should say, from her sources. Okay, anything else?
Yes, Yvonne has her hand up. Go ahead, Yvonne.
About the Akashic records, I remember something too. Like BL, you said it's on the monadic plane, but I think I remember reading that there's a reflection of it that people tune into on the astral plane when they say they're reading the Akashic records. They're really not on the monadic plane. They're really on the astral plane, which you said disappears. So is there like a reflection there?
Well, that's, I think BL mentioned that there's a reflected astral light. And so it would have a lot to do with the quality of your connection as to whether you were just reading what you wanted to be reading, because that's the nature of the astral, is that it molds itself to your wish life, and so it's incredibly unreliable or I should say, until your consciousness transcends it, right? If you're of it and you're in it, it's unreliable in terms of any kind of absolute truth. But I could imagine that someone who's mentally polarized and, even a low initiate, but had this kind of vision, could read it without influencing it themselves. That's just my guess.
Okay, is there something that says to read the Akashic records, you have to be a vegetarian for so many years or something? Purify yourself?
Yeah, well, whenever I hear a statement like that, I think of the Tibetans where nothing grows. In Tibet, where nothing grows, right? And they eat almost entirely meat-based diet in grains, because that's all there is. And yet, here we have these great masters who lived in Shagatsi, Tibet, so clearly they were meat eaters. So it's not a universal idea. DK goes into this at some length, saying at one point that if you want to develop a certain kind of higher vision, that you need to, at least for a certain period, be a vegetarian. But he also says at some point that you get past all of this, and you can eat anything. You know, it reminds me of Back to the Future when the second time he returns, he just throws garbage into the car and it runs just fine. You know, the first time it had to be a very particular kind of fuel. But at a certain point, when you are no longer of this realm and your reality is polarized down these higher levels, then it wouldn't matter what your diet was. It's just not going to affect anything, your vision included. So that's my understanding. Anyone else?
And then Efrosini says, the 4 lower planes need more agents of justice and recorders of actions. I wonder if the higher 3 planes have overcome this need. Love overcomes law, as Apostle Paul mentioned.
Yeah, I don't think any negative, certainly no negative karma. I would think any karma is accrued on the highest 3 planes. In fact, even down through the Buddhic, I think it probably starts in the lower half of the monastic plane, that any negative karma accrues at all. I think as soon as you're in the realm of soul and higher, that you're out of the realm of karma altogether. That doesn't mean that if you have an experience on that level that you've broken those chains, but if you have your being in those levels, or I should say, those beings who exist on those levels exclusively or primarily would be karma free. Your soul, for instance, has no world karma. Anyone
And then
else?
Scott.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Scott's got his hand. Go ahead.
I'm reminded of St. Paul, the 3rd degree initiate, who, being a Scorpio, the twist he put on humanity is something like that DK has mentioned. And surely I would think there would be some personal karma to that the way what he wrote and the way he presented it and how Christians have followed that. And
yeah, in fact, I imagine he's been working to undo that as a master, along with the Christ, Jesus, I should say, along with the Master Jesus. You know, he's probably right in there working to undo the way the teachings came down in those early days.
what he wrote, it may not be in a sense personal karma, but it is group or kingdom karma.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, you know, because I think he did put a personal spin on it.
Sure.
That's certainly how it reads to me, you know, and so it could be personal karma. Now, of course, it wasn't intentional distortion, but nonetheless, you know, it had such far-reaching consequences that it certainly, I would think, he accrued karma. Yeah. Anyone else?
No, that's all I see.
Well, that's
we have
yeah.
Christine's hands up, and I just wanted to remind you of the time.
Yeah, we're there. I've been watching. Yeah, let's finish the questions and we'll call it a day.
Okay. Christine, did you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Unfortunately, I missed the point of that, and I'd like you to clarify what that karmic discussion was about.
Okay, just where and how is karma generated? And
No, about the specific teachings that have been distorted.
Well, let's go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I had trouble understanding his voice.
Yeah, Scott, what were the specific teachings that were?
I'm not a scholar on that. I know in general he put the scorpionic twist to it, was dealing with sex, and I think there was a heavy hand that he put in in the way of karma.
Yeah, the idea of damnation, was he part of that, propagating that black and white form?
I suspect, but there are surely biblical scholars here who know more than I.
Yeah, well, if yeah, it's the teachings of St. Paul, the original, teachings and his influence, which, yeah, I know that he, as you said, he wrote negatively rather than naturalistically about sex, that sex itself is bad. The whole idea that the form aspect is evil, came through his writings. But for a really accurate rendition, you'd have to read them, interpret them, or talk to somebody who's done so. Yeah. Sorry, I can't give you a better answer than that, but that's where we are. Okay, folks, that's it. Until next time, it's a great privilege and pleasure for me to do this. It really, our conversations, the dialogue really does deepen our understanding. So thanks for being here. And can we get dates for next time?
Sure. The next Secret Doctrine will be on the 19th of September, 7 p.m. And before that, the next Secret Teaching of All Ages will be on 5 September.
Okay, so we get a 3-week break instead of the usual 2 between now and the next.
Because we got lucky, and in August there were 5 Sundays.
That's right. So, okay, folks, hope to see you. There's a lot of parallel connection between the teachings that come in through the Secret Doctrine and through the Secret Teachings of All Ages. For instance, you could have a whole discussion about the karma of Atlantis and its destruction, and what that looked like, and what and why it was instituted in the way it was, all that kind of thing. So, and we're going to be looking at that in our next session on the 5th. So until then, have a good one, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.